Hi everybody. It's time for reading with Mr. Bob again as we continue on in our story with J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. Now, this is the second part of Chapter 2, Roast Mutton. And it looks like we're going to be able to finish this in this part of the second chapter rather than taking 4 parts to finish the first chapter like we did. So, let's move on as we remember that Bilbo and Gandalf and the dwarves had set off on their journey towards the Lonely Mountain, and they had come into a bit of difficulty as they get into the forest running low on food. They find a light near at the dark in the forest, and so they decide to send Bilbo to see what the light is all about. And this is where we come to our story. 3 very large persons sitting around a very large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton on long spits of wood and licking the gravy off of their fingers. There was a fine, toothsome smell. Also, there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls. Obviously trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that. From the great heavy faces of them, and their size, and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing room fashion at all. At all. Drawing room fashion is a kind of an idiom for saying that they were not very cultured or very polite in how they talked or spoke. Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if I don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls. Never a blinking bit of man-flesh have we had for long enough, said a second. What the hell William was thinking of bringing us into these parts at all beats me. And the drink running short, what's more, he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked. Shut your mouth, he said as soon as he could. You can't expect folk to stop here for just to be et by you and Bert. You've got to have a village and a half between you since we came down from the village. How much more do you want? And time's been up our way, when you would have said, Thank you, Bill, for a nice bit of fat valley mutton like what this is. He took a big bite off of sheep's leg he was toasting, and wiped his lips on the sleeve. Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, and even those with only 1 head each. After hearing all this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there was 3 fair-sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, quite likely to be toasted dwarf or a bit of pony for a change. Or else he should have done a quick bit of good burglaring. A really first-class and legendary burglar would at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It is nearly always worthwhile if you can manage it. Pinched the very mutton off the spits, purloined the beer, and walked off without their noticing him. Others, more practical, but with less professional pride, would perhaps have stuck a dagger into each of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had read of a good many things he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorin and company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows. Of the various laborious proceedings he had heard of picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult. So, at last, he crept behind a tree, just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. Ha! He thought, warming to his new work as he lifted it carefully out. This is a beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. It was enchanted. Who are you? The purse squeaked as it left the pocket, and William turned around at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind the tree. Blimey, Bert, look what I've caught, said William. What is it? Said the others, coming up. Let me find us. What are you? Bilbo Baggins, a Hobbit, said poor Bilbo, shaking all over, wondering how to make owl noises before they throttled him. A burra hobbit? Said they, a bit startled. Trolls are slow in the uptake, and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. What's a burra hobbit got to do with my pocket anyway? Said William. Can you cook 'em? Said Tom. You can try, said Bert, picking up a skewer. He wouldn't make above a mouthful, said William, who had already had a fine supper, not when he was skinned and boned. Perhaps there are more like him round about, and we might make a pie, said Bert. Here, you, are there any more of your sort squeaking about in these woods? You nasty little rabbit, said he, looking at the hobbit's furry feet, and he picked him up by the toes and shook him. Yes, lots, said Bilbo, before he remembered not to give his friends away. None at all, not one, he said immediately afterwards. What do you mean? Said Bert, holding him right away by the hair this time. What I say, said Bilbo, gasping, and please don't cook me, kind sirs. I am a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, a beautifully perfect breakfast, if only you won't have me for supper. Poor little blighter, said William. He had already had as much supper as he could hold. Also, he had had lots of beer. Poor little blighter, let him go. Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all, said Bert. I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes in the fire till he talks. I won't have it, said William. I caught him anyway. You're a fat fool, said William. Are you a fat fool, William, said Bert, as I've said afore this evening. And you're allowed. I won't take that from you, Bill Uggins, said Bert, and put his fist in William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet, before they were fighting like dogs, calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and applicable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in another's arms, rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping, while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses. And that, of course, only made them the madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left. But his poor little feet had been very squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round. So there he lay for a while panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight came up Balin. The dwarves had heard noises from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or to hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the sight of dwarves, uncooked that is. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately, and, "A sack, Tom, quick!" they said, before Balin, who was wondering where in all this commotion Bilbo was, knew what was coming. A sack was over his head, and he was down. "There's more yet to come," said Tom. "I'm mighty mistook. Lots and none at all, it is," said he. "No burra hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it." "I reckon you're right," said Bert, "and we'd best get out of the light." And so they did. With sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and plunder, they waited in the shadows. As each dwarf came up and looked at the fire, the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton, in surprise, pop! A nasty, smelly sack went over his head, and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin, and Fili and Kili together, and Dori and Nori and Ori all in a heap, and Oin and Gloin and Bifur and Bofer and Bomber piled uncomfortably near the fire. "That'll teach him," said Tom, for Bifur and Bomber had given a lot of trouble, and fought like mad, as dwarves often will when cornered. Thorn came last, and he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and he didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out of the sacks to tell him that things were not all well. He stood outside in the shadows some way off, and said, "What's all this trouble? Who has been knocking my people about? It's Trolls, said Bilbo from behind the tree. They had forgotten all about him. They're hiding in the bushes with sacks, said he. Oh, are they? Said Thorin. And he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught up a big branch all on fire on one end, and Bert caught that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk. But he was sent spinning up into the top of some bushes, when Tom kicked the sparks up in Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in the teeth for that one, and lost one of the front teeth. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just at that moment, William came up behind and popped the sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes. And so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in sacks, with 3 hungry trolls and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, mince them fine or boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. Bilbo, up in a bush with his clothes and his skin torn, did not dare to move for fear that they should hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back, but no one saw him. The trolls had just decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of argument, they all agreed to it. No good roasting them now. It'd take all night, said a voice. Bert thought it was William's. Don't start the argument all over again, Bill, he said, or it will take all night. Who's an arguing, said William, who thought it was Bert that had spoken. You are, said Bert. You're a liar, said William. And so the argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a black pot, and they took out their knives. No good boiling them. We ain't got no water. And it's a long way to the well and all, said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. Shut up, said they, or we'll never have done. And you can fetch the water yourself if you say any more. Shut up yourself, said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. Who's arguing but you, I'd like to know. You're a booby, said William. Booby yourself, said Tom. That was the way trolls talked, evidently. And so the argument began all over again, and went on hotter than ever, until at last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them, and then boil them next time. Who shall we sit on first, said the voice. Better sit on the last fellow first, said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by Thorin. He thought it was Tom talking. Don't talk to yourself, said Tom, but if he wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he? The one with the yellow stockings, said Bert. Nonsense! The one with the gray stockings, said a voice like William's. I made sure it was yellow, said Bert. Yellow it was, said William. Then what do you say it was gray for? Said Bert. I never did. Tom said it. That I never did, said Tom. It was you. 2 to 1, so shut your mouth, said Bert. Who are you talking to? Said William. Now stop it, said Tom and Bert together. The night's getting on, and on dawn comes early. Let's get on with it. Dawn take you all and be stoned to you, said a voice that sounded like William's. But it wasn't. For just at that moment the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to stone as he stooped. Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him. And there they stand to this day, all alone, unless the birds perch on them. For trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains in which they are made, and never move again. That is what had happened to Bert and Tom and William. Excellent, said Gandalf, as he stepped from behind a tree, and helped Bilbo to come down out of a thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls bickering and quarreling until the light came and made an end to them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what had happened to them twice over before they were satisfied. "Silly time to go practicing pinching and pocket picking," said Momber, "when what was wanted is fire and food." "And that's just what you wouldn't have had got of those fellows without a struggle in any case," said Gandalf. Anyhow, you are wasting time. Don't you realize that the trolls must have a cave or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it." They searched about and soon found the marks of the trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, not though they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. "Would this be any good?" asked Bilbo, when they were getting tired and angry. "I found it on the ground where the trolls had their fight." He held out a largish key, though no doubt William had thought it very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he had turned to stone. "Why on earth didn't you mention it before?" they cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole. Then the stone door swung back with a big push, and they all went inside. And there were bones in the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air. But there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground, among an untidy litter of plunder, of all sorts, from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins, standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the walls, too small for trolls. I'm afraid they belonged to victims, and among them were several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Two caught their eye particularly because of their beautiful scabbards and jeweled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but this was as good as a short sword for the hobbit. "These look like good blades," said the wizard, half drawing them and looking at them curiously. "They were not made by any troll, nor by any smith among men in these parts and days. But when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them." "Let's get out of this horrible smell," said Fili. So they carried out the pots of coins, and such food as was untouched and looked fit to eat. Also 1 barrel of ale, which was still full. But that time they felt like breakfast. Being very hungry, they did not turn their noses up at what they had got from the troll's larder. Their own provisions were very scanty. Now they had bread and cheese and plenty of ale, and bacon to toast in the embers of the fire. After that they slept, for their night had been disturbed, and they did nothing more until the afternoon. Then they brought up the ponies, and carried away the pots of gold, and buried them very secretly, not far from the track by the river, putting a great very many spells over them, just in case they had ever had the chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted once more, jogged along again on the path towards the east. "Where did you go to, if I may ask?" said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along. "To look ahead," said he. "And what brought you back in the nick of time?" "Looking behind," he said. "Exactly," said Thorin, "but could you be more plain?" "I went on to spy our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell." "Where's that?" "Don't interrupt," said Gandalf. "You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and find out all about it. As I was saying, I met 2 of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of the trolls. It was they who told me that 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from the road. They had frightened everyone away from the district, and they had waylaid strangers. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere." "Thank you," said Thorin. And that's the end of Chapter 2, Roast Mutton. Next time we start Chapter 3, A Short Rest, as we continue on with The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a good day. This is Mr. Bob saying goodbye.